This week on the Notorious Scoundrels podcast.
Of the bad options, Rebel Troopers were the best bad option. But now that we have clones and droids,
let's make it a new drop. Sorry, continue.
Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a podcast focused on tactics and competitive play for Star Wars Legion. Hosted by Kyle Dornbos, Michael Barry, and David Zelenka, with Jay Shalansky, the man behind the glass.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Mike and David, as usual, with Jay behind the glass. How you guys doing?
Yo, I am putting together my clone troopers right now because my droids took forever. So
that sounds awesome. Just don't drop anything on Mike.
Yeah. Did you, how long did it take you? Did you finish the droids?
I am working through my second core box right now. I have not put together any of my barks because they're bad. But I put together everything else.
Are you a little scarred by your experience last week?
I mean, it certainly brought it to the forefront of my mind. I wouldn't say I'm scarred. I felt pretty confident they weren't great before that, but here we are. I didn't put my barks together.
So what you're saying is he sent a message, right? He kind of told you in a certain way, communicated you through the medium of Legion. That
I'm gonna have to put one together, right?
Yeah,
because you can't really run a clone army with 7 activations and hope to win. But yeah, I don't know. So that's what I'm doing. I'm great. My birthday's today, I guess, when you're hearing this cast. So,
hey, happy birthday!
Yeah, I'm 30, so I'm old now.
You gonna start getting some grades?
Join the club.
I do. My mom and my sister came down for this weekend, and my mom was like, "Mike, you got some gray hair going on there." And I was like,
well, thanks for pointing that out. I feel so much better now.
Right? Yeah. So, in any case, that's what's going on with me.
Well, hopefully our Nats will not suck the next 2 games. I know this isn't a baseball podcast, but it's depressing.
I mean, frankly, based on their current track record, I don't have high hopes. But I mean, rebellions are built on hope, right?
That's right. Sometimes you just got to roll a hard 6, right?
Yeah.
You never know. All right,
let's get to it.
All right. So, housekeeping. Our Patreon is up on thefifthtrooper.com. Has been, and if you like what you hear on this show and on the Fifth Trooper and the other stuff you see on that site, feel free to support us on Patreon. thefifthtrooper.com. You can also find some awesome mats there. We have 5 different ones, and we've discussed them in detail in the past, but feel free to go check those out too.
Yeah, it's worth noting that I think the YouTube videos from this weekend are up on the our YouTube page, but Jay and Evan went to Kappa Cup this weekend, and I believe they streamed some games. So, check that out. I think it's probably like somewhere between 6 and 8 hours, if I had to guess. I haven't actually had time to watch it yet, so because it was my birthday weekend. So.
Are you guys going to talk about, or Jay, are you going to talk about Kappa Cup on Fifth Trooper tomorrow? All right, yeah. So I'm really excited to listen to that episode too and their experience there. So if you guys want to head over to the flagship podcast when it comes out, I guess 2 days from this recording, check them out. Highly recommend.
Yep. All right, so let's hit some news real quick.
Welcome to In the News.
All right, so 2 bits here. The first is, at least according to Mr. Matt Holland, the illustrious Matt Holland on Facebook, Dooku and Rex are going to be out on November 15th.
Yo, so where is this post? I saw people talking about it in Discord. I was looking for it today. I couldn't find it anywhere. Where did this happen?
It's buried somewhere on the main Facebook. I responded also and asked if he could tell us anything about the operatives, but he has not responded to me. But
Maybe I don't have to put my part together. I can just play Rex.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, that's what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks away?
Yep.
Roughly, yeah.
Problem solved.
Yeah, and I assume this is a general release, not like a Spanish or Chilean or Italian release. So yeah, we'll get some actual in English in the United States Rex and Dooku to play with, according to the Facebooks. So we'll see.
Didn't that say like Q1 on it?
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, it's really weird. Like, I mean, originally when they were previewed, can't talk today, at Gen Con, yeah, they said Q1 2020. So obviously, it's not there yet. But yeah, I mean, getting things earlier than expected is always good. So we'll see. I'm wondering, like, are they going to keep doing one release a month, or are we just going to get dumped a bunch of stuff? I don't know. Or maybe everything's behind. Who knows?
I think my wallet would appreciate it if they slowed down a little bit.
Right? Like,
it's a good problem to have, I think.
I got a lot of things to paint. Yeah, it is a good problem to have.
I'm just grateful that Rex and Duke are here before January. I mean, holy moly. Like when I first heard about that at Gen Con, I was like, man, that is going to be a long wait. But I think especially for the clones, having Rex is going to, soften a lot of issues they might have with their activation counts. And I'm just eager to see what happens with that and how people decide to run him. Will they run him solo? Will they run him next to Obi like some sort of Leia? What will they do?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. Obviously, at least somebody posted some Spanish command cards. We don't speak Spanish, so we're not going to try and translate any of those. But hopefully, we'll get some English previews here shortly too.
Yeah,
that we can then talk about. So, all right. So Australian Nationals also happened this last weekend.
Indeed, it did.
That was won by Triple Tauntauns.
Surprise, everybody.
And I think that was Beefcake from the Discord. Is that accurate?
Yes.
I saw a picture of a bunch of Aussie dudes floating around, and he was the one in the middle holding a trophy. So I think that's him.
Yeah, he had that one there. Zakonia also made an appearance in that photo.
Yeah.
But I won't elaborate any further.
Yep.
But,
Australian friends.
But congrats to Beefcake, man. Like, I first saw him play. He was playing Double Bounty in season 3 of Invader. That was when I first learned of him, and since then, I mean, he's gone on to win this event.
Yeah, he was in the. I played him in the final in Invader, so he's nice to see him doing well with the Rebels. There were apparently only 2 Triple Tauntaun lists. And a smattering of other stuff. Quite a lot of variety, actually. I heard about some X-34s and stuff too. So I don't know what the tables look like.
There was a cheap Landspeeder build in the top 4.
Yeah.
Shannon Rios.
Cheap Landspeeder. What do you mean?
Landspeeder, and I think it was like Landspeeder, Pilot, and Rocket Launcher for 120. Which is like, okay. What? But at the same time, it's sort of like, this thing can do objectives. It's armored. And in fact, I was talking with Beefcake briefly, and he said, I really didn't expect this Landspeeder to survive like it did, because things just couldn't get the normal hits through, and he couldn't get the crits either. So if he got a bunch of normal hits, it was all soaked up by cover armor, and without criticals, he just wasn't doing damage to it. He was saying, if I have an ATST, I cut it in half, but if I have Z6s, I'm kind of screwed if my crits don't show up.
Yeah, he, I mean, those X-34s are pretty difficult to kill with things that aren't shore troopers and ATSTs. So,
yeah, here's the breakout I've actually found the breakout of the top lists that were there. Top 16 was 9 Rebel, 7 Imps. Top 8, most of the Imps got knocked. And then top 4, 3 Rebel, 1 Imperial. And then in the top 16, there were 2 Triple Tauns, 2 Triple Rotaries, 2 Triple Snipers, 2 Triple Mortars. So all of the usual suspects showed up to this top 16, I think, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So can we? I mean, this is one event, but we've been talking about Tauntauns and Shore Troopers for a while now. Do we feel like the meta has sort of, I don't know, shaken out?
It's starting to. I think it's starting to settle on a couple of archetypes. It's settling on triple Tauntauns and triple Rotaries for Rebels for sure. I think the Rotary got a huge boost with that points reduction, and especially got a boost because this unit called the Tauntaun dropped, and crits don't care about dodges, and vehicle engagement rules are different than trooper engagement rules, so it got a massive boost there in the mirror. Plus, DLTs kind of started going away, and instead of throwing a 2-dice weapon at an ATRT, now a Shore has to throw a 4-dice weapon if it wants to, have a non-random chance of damaging it. But even then, it's still random because it's critical and not impact. So it may not, throw it may not throw a crit anyway. So there was definitely some positive changes there for the ATRT.
Yeah, I've played Shores against RTs, and even with Surge Crit or Critical 1, fishing for crits doesn't feel great there.
No.
I definitely miss my DLTs. I will say that the Mortar is surprisingly good at damaging them, though.
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely like where you might want to look. And it sucks though having to shoot your suppressive weapon at an armored vehicle. Like that does suck. But if you want to kill it, that's a way to do it.
Yep. All right. So let's dive right into our hot take section because we have a spicy one today. We're also gonna after that talk about just in Legion 101, this is going to be a little bit of a follow-on, but gunline play generally and how to do that mechanically. But let's hit our hot take first.
Vader is way higher than everything else.
Like Tauntauns, Leia's 2-pip polishes many a turd.
It's not like you can just delete Luke and put into Tauntauns and that's a net gain necessarily.
It'll be the Salt City because I'll be there.
Dang it, Kyle. I'm going to sell you on fire support with mortars.
Somebody aim tokens, we can't say it on the radio.
Yeah, I think
come at me, bro.
That's a lot to unpack. Maybe we should just burn the whole suitcase instead.
Thoughts, Jay?
Yep. The same.
Nothing but the best analysis right here, folks. Yeah. All right, so David, you got a good one for us today. You wanna introduce this topic?
All right, I'm gonna try to break this to everyone gently because I have some evidence to support this standpoint. But I'll say the hot take is that Rebel troopers are actually better without their heavy weapon, which is a seriously hot take. It goes against like all the common knowledge that sort of has been accrued here. But I just want to I'm going to talk about this both in terms of the options that Rebels have and I'm going to use the word imbalance here, but I don't want people to think I'm saying overpowered. I'm talking about imbalance in terms of we don't play with the same pieces. Okay, that's the context that I'm using this word imbalance. So imbalance has existed because we don't play with the same pieces. Sorry?
Do we want to call it asymmetry then?
Yeah, we'll call it asymmetry. But it's also like I like the word imbalance too because I read a lot of Jeremy Solman. He's a chess master, and
sure,
he uses that word imbalance specifically because it applies to chess that way. But I think I can use asymmetry. So we have asymmetry in what our troopers can do. We have asymmetry in our stat lines, and now we have new factions that are coming in that really throw those asymmetries into high relief. So. For a long time, Rebels with Z6 have been the go-to unit for competitive lists. And that's for, one, because we only had 2 choices in core units. One was the Fleet Trooper, which,
is bad.
Well,
move on.
I was bad. Move on. Well, I mean, I'm just for multiple reasons. Okay. They're very offensively efficient. All right. But if you pay the extra points to ensure them against suppression, they start to lose out on that efficiency. Plus they fall off when they get killed. Right. And then we had, Shores and Veterans come out. Okay. And Veterans, I think they were definitely on the losing end, right? Because defend is ultimately an opponent's choice effect. The Mark II doesn't have the range 4 that keeps it safe. It also doesn't have red defense dice. And target is always useful. And that kind of leads me into discussing, the wow factor that all troopers have. Like, all the troopers have a wow factor, whatever that is. For shores, it's target. For snows, it's steady. I mean, free attacks are always good. Storms have precise. You have fairly easy access to aim tokens between, Veers spotting you and just being able to stand and shoot with your range 4 guns. And then, of course, target and coordinate. So, all these wow factors that the Empire has are great. Like, they're almost always useful. I mean, Rebels have nimble, which, is fine. Fleets have ready, which is a joke. Ready isn't a joke, though, on a unit like Death Troopers. So the context is really important. And then what am I missing? Yeah, veterans have defend, which, again, opponent's choice dodges sometimes don't work. But again, like, of the bad options, Rebel Troopers were the best bad option. But now that we have clones and droids,
let's make it a new drop. Sorry, continue.
I also I'm gonna let you continue, but I'm gonna have to hard disagree.
Okay,
continue.
Okay. I'm not gonna just soapbox forever here. I'm gonna keep going.
No, you're fine. You can soapbox. Okay. Go for it. That's what this is for.
So these asymmetries existed, right? And dodge, again, I say dodge, is not always the best thing because it sometimes doesn't fire, and it only works if your opponent chooses to shoot the unit that's dodged. They might have other things they could shoot. And I mean, this is kind of old ground if you've been listening to us for any length of time, but I think it was important to just get those all out there before we enter the next chapter of this saga, which is that now we have clones and droids. And clones and droids, they beat the hell out of the Rebel range, both in terms of stat lines and wow factors. So, I mean, let's start with clones, right? Clones are the obvious one because you have a straight up comparison between Phase 1 clones with a Z6 and Rebel Troopers with a Z6, right? And I mean, clones have a premium cost, but it's not absurd to think of running 6 of them, in the list. I mean, not just because it's the only troop they have right now, but just in general, right? And especially with like Rex coming into the picture, like clones are going to love having 6 Phase 1s because it's got their best like wow factor, which is the token sharing.
That's not fair.
Okay.
That's not fair.
Okay.
That's not, and that's not fair because clones don't have anything else.
Yeah, but
like the only reason you're taking 6 Phase 1s is because what else am I going to do? I literally have to.
Yeah, but you have token sharing though. Like it's not a problem. You know what I mean? Rebels don't have anything else because they don't have anything else.
Taking 6 Rebel Troopers for the first year and a half of this game was mostly because the other options were not good.
Yeah, and have the other options ever really been good? I think the answer is no.
We had sniper strike
no,
teams.
I mean, let's limit the scope of the discussion to core units right now because we're talking about investing points in cores.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that the conversation takes place in a vacuum. I think that the reason that Rebel Troopers like Z6 Troopers are seen like people are considering that they're less good is because Tauntauns and RTs and FDs are hyper efficient to the point where they're almost just better than taking a Z6.
Right, and we're ultimately getting to that. Like that's kind of what I'm coming around to. But again, like we're talking about what to invest your points in a competitive build. And let's say I invest in 6 Z6 Rebel Troopers.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell am I going to do against, a shore gun line or against?
Maybe you shouldn't.
Exactly my point. And so, but I mean, again, like there's evidence for this apart from just like, saying this is bad, right? We're trying to talk about why it's bad. And so I'm saying it's bad because the clones can level at you the same firepower. They have red defense. Sometimes with surge on both ends because of Obi. They have fire support. So if you're dumb enough to walk into range 3 of 2 of them, they just wipe you out because you only have 5 health and white defense. And then droids are, eating us on the other side here because they have 8 wounds and they can survive the Alpha Strike, and they're more points efficient than we are for, 1 less or 2 less attack facings. But they have 8 wounds. And they also have this, AI, they have this coordinate thing, which they can get all their orders out. They have perfect activation control. So
all right, you're not convincing me why I should be taking naked Rebel Troopers over Z6.
The point. Okay. Well, the point is that why do you invest points in these Z6 troopers that just get taken off the board or outdone in all these other departments?
So
why should you throw those points there? Because every other army in the game is going to outdo you at the same job.
I want to attack your premise, because I'm hearing that Rebel Troopers are bad because of clones and droids
and shores,
and
every other trooper in the game.
I think if we want to have the Rebel Troopers versus shores conversation, I think that's fair. I think shore troopers at range 4 with critical significantly make Rebel Troopers with Z6s a lot worse. I don't think that clones and droids have that same effect. I think that the clone droid matchups are actually much fairer than the shore trooper versus Rebel Trooper matchup.
Yes, that I could agree with.
Okay, but even beyond that, this is not about. This is about why am I taking a naked Rebel Trooper over a Z6?
Because you want to take 3 Tauntauns, Luke, and whatever.
Correct.
Other fun stuff.
You want to invest your points in things that function better at their jobs.
Okay, so
and I don't think that's a bad thing. Just to be clear,
I agree. I was waiting for us to get around to that, which is really the core of this argument, right? Because this isn't really about Rebel Troopers versus shores, or Rebel Troopers versus B1s, or Rebel Troopers versus clones. This is about Rebel Troopers versus Tauntauns, or Rebel Troopers versus Luke. Right. Or Rebel Troopers versus Sniper Strike teams.
But it's also versus these other units too, because again, you're talking about if I'm playing a particular style of army, why wouldn't I buy into and play armies that have the best resources to accomplish that objective?
So let's take Australian Nationals as an example here. So I think correct me if I'm wrong, but clones and droids were legal for that event, right?
I don't know.
I don't know. Actually, let's see. When was it? This past weekend?
Shores definitely were.
Yeah, I think they were.
Okay.
Yeah,
so we had I'm recalling from memory.
Yeah, I actually think that was a premiere, so I don't think clones and droids would have been legal. But anyway, continue.
So we had shores. Yep. We had shores, which I think we can all appreciate are probably enemy number 1 if we're discounting Tauntauns right now. And the top 4 was what? 3 rebels, 1 empire.
Correct.
And that says to me that at least on a macro level, the faction is not busted.
Right. That's not what I'm alleging.
And by broke, I know, I understand. But to some extent, saying that the fundamental core unit, and I guess I'm not saying you're saying this, but I do want to kind of distance ourselves from saying that rebels are not working, because frankly, saying that their most fundamental and efficient core unit since the game started for the last 2 years doesn't work anymore is very close to saying if we don't change the conversation that there is a problem with the faction.
I don't think there's a problem with the faction. I just think that in the competitive landscape as it stands, you're not going to be rewarded for taking a gunline more than taking triple Tauns and a hero would reward you. And snipers would reward you.
And rebels shouldn't win in a gunfight. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that's another what do you call it? A design thing, right? That's not a actual discussion of the points and the landscape,
I actually disagree with that, because I want to introduce another caveat here, and I think this gets at the core point that we're making. But rebels don't and shouldn't win a gunfight with just Rebel Troopers E6s.
Yeah, you got to take 2 FD turrets and some snipers.
Well, I don't know about 2, but yeah, you still want to be taking snipers. We said this basically since the sniper nerf. Like, Rebel players should still be taking 2 to 3 snipers. They're still amazing. You need them to extend your threat range. And like, if you want to throw an FD in there, I've used an FD in 4 of my 5 Invader League games, and every single match it's been freaking amazing.
Yeah, there are better things to take now.
Well, yes, so there are definitely better things to take. The Rebels have strong options in all of the other slots, including the ones we alluded to. And I think that the core of this argument is if you're cutting Z6s, then you're making more room for those other things.
Correct.
Which I can see the argument for. However, I also think, I mean, the Z6 is still one of the most efficient units in the game at range 3. It's not as efficient as Shores, and it's not as efficient as B1s.
Right.
But, you know, I think, at least for me personally, now maybe this is just me being like a curmudgeon-y gunline Rebel player.
I mean, that is what you
I have nostalgia for those days. Continue.
But I think that they are still, you know, they still turn a anemic offensive unit, which is a naked Rebel trooper unit, into a very solid offensive unit. And if you've already got points for those other things, rotaries, Tauntauns, snipers, Luke, whatever, you know, and you can still take 3 to 4 Z6s, like, I don't see a problem with that. That's what I've been doing. I've been running, you know, some combination of Luke, rotaries, and FD, snipers, and Z6s, and I still end up with 4 to 5 Z6s after I fit those other things in. And I think that's fine. Like, the Z6s, you know, they're not going to be able to go toe to toe with Shores, and you don't send them toe to toe with Shores,
because you'll lose. Right. Just to be
right. Clear. But what you can do is use them to, you know, once the Shores are distracted with something else, or if you're doing good conservative gunline play, you know, you get the Z6s in the mix once your other excellent assets that Rebels have that are good, your rotaries, your Tauntauns, Luke, whatever, once they're providing something else for the Shores to worry about, then you get in there with the Z6s and you start cleaning up, because Z6s still do good damage for 62 points. They're still one of the most efficient units in the game.
Only if you get the hits. Like, they don't have any way to fix their dice. And that's, I think, their fundamental issue, is that you're basically praying that the variance comes in your favor, and you maybe get some damage through.
They've always been like that, though, right?
They have, but the circumstances of the game shifted to where you don't have time to wait for variance to happen. And I mean, and you're sort of waiting by the phone, right? And that phone call may never come in. You know? You're waiting by the phone. You're waiting for, like, oh, hello, oh, 4 crits, oh, you know, oh, thank you for helping me win this game. You know,
it's interesting because I think that you know, Rebels have been relying on Z6s to do most of their damage for a large portion of the game, and I think the reason that we're seeing this shift is because of that to some extent. You know, your rotaries, your Tauntauns, like, the damage is consistent, right? The damage is there, and it's going to be there. And so I think we kind of have to shift how we look at Z6s to some extent. You know, they're more of a spike play as opposed to this is my, you know, consistent unit, you know. Not that Z6s were always consistent, but they were certainly, as a baseline, one of the most consistent things the Rebels could be doing. And now that has shifted, I think that they take a different spot in the army. You know, they're in there. They're like, okay, this damage would be nice, but it's not necessary. Whereas your Tauntauns and your rotaries and your FDs are like, this is the damage output that I actually like. If it doesn't happen, I just lose the game.
Right. Like, if, you know, and I've always taken this approach with Z6s, is that you don't want to be putting them in a position where if you whiff a roll, you lose the game. Like, you know, they are variance monsters from roll to roll, but over the course of a 6-turn game with, you know, 4 to 6 Z6s, you're going to make a lot of Z6 attacks, and they're going to be consistent over the course of the game. As long as you're not putting yourself in a position where, like, any individual roll of that Z6 is going to decide the game, you're going to be fine. And I think that's still true.
I disagree heavily, but please go on.
Okay, I mean, you're relying on your snipers, your Tauntauns, your rotaries, your Luke, whatever, to be your reliable pieces, and your Z6s are there to be scoring units and pick up boxes and do all of the things that they've always done. You know, put pressure on your opponent when pressure is already on them from other things, and they don't have time to worry about your Z6s.
Well, this is a great way to bridge the conversation back towards the premise, which is naked versus Zs. And I thought it was really interesting that you said your Z6s are there to pick up boxes, because if you're just there to pick up boxes, you could do it with a 40-point unit. You could also repair evaporators with a 40-point unit. And how often is it that, you know, your snipers would rather be doing shooting rather than doing evaporators, whereas the Z6s are on the front line, you know? So there's tension there between investing in a gun that is then going to spend its time doing objectives. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're not spending all game doing objectives.
For
Usually,
sure.
quote unquote, objective scoring units are doing at least the things that require interacting, the boxes and VAPs. They're doing those the first few turns, and then the last few turns they're advancing, shooting,
Right.
pushing, whatever. So, you know, the reason I say like they're doing the things that they've always done is you need somebody to do that. But like whenever, and this has been true, you know, whenever I've taken a naked unit or a unit that's not really good at anything except interacting with objectives, they spend like, you know, the first 2 turns doing that thing. And then I'm like, all right, now what the heck do I do with these guys? You know, throw 4 black dice at heavy cover and hope for a crit. Like, I mean,
Sometimes, yeah.
right. But my point is like,
You were hoping for crits anyway with Z6s, though. Because they're just...
well, right, but you have more than twice as many dice.
Well, yeah, you have 10 versus 4, but you know.
And like, it's only, you know, the reason that like we're talking about efficiency, a Z6 is, you know, you're essentially like doubling the efficiency of the unit for only 22 points.
Right.
So, you know, you could argue that you could be like, if you have those 22 points and you'd rather be spending them on snipers or Tauntauns or whatever, then you should be doing that. And I think I generally agree with you.
Yeah.
But I also think that you can have those toys, like Rebel units, generally speaking, are cheap enough that you can have those pretty toys and still take like 4 Z6s,
Right.
at least in my experience.
And don't get me wrong, a lot of this is having played that style with trips. When I say trips, I mean triple taunts. A lot of this arises out of having played the style with triple tauntauns. I was like, okay, I got points for 5 Z6s. But then the 5 Z6s just end up getting smashed by the dedicated gunline armies, even with the Tauntauns getting in there. You know, they still have time to smash your gunline. So it just seems a little bit of a waste to even invest in a bad gunline, quote unquote bad, in the sense that it's worse than everyone else's because I ran trips.
I don't think that Rebel Gunlines are worse than Droid Gunlines. I think you can make the argument that it's probably.
I think they
worse
straight
than
up are worse than Droid Gunlines. Droids do the same job more efficiently, 100%, and they're fully in control the entire time, and they're immune to suppression essentially.
Okay, all right. So let's say that they're worse than droids, but like, it's not by a ton. Like they can still win that matchup. But I do think that you like when you line up across the table from a Krennic double DT aggressive tactics triple shore triple mortar list, like you got to accept that you're going to have to play.
Well, before we go too much further, also it's not that they're even less defensive than Rebel Troopers because they have surges on defense occasionally from AT. But let's go on.
Sure. But I think, you know, we're getting to the point in the game where there's a little bit more rock, paper, scissors going on that we haven't had before. You know, lists are starting to become a little bit more unique and a little bit more powerful. You know, we've got the triple tauntaun list, which is frankly is pretty good against gunline.
Yes, no question there.
You know, and we've got the Krennic aggressive tactics Death Trooper, Shore Trooper, monstrosity that just buries you in dice at range 4. And I think that if you're taking quote unquote Rebel Gunline, you probably have to have a decent bid and be taking Lim Viz in your deck,
or you need to be running triple snipers with possibly an FD.
Right, and you have to out activate them too. I think, like if you're not out activating them and you're at a range disadvantage, like you're in a world of hurt.
You're going to be in pain because then you're the idiot moving and shooting into them rather than the other way around.
Exactly, and they're just sitting there aim shooting with their Death Troopers and Shore Troopers, and that doesn't work out well for you either. So I think that people have to adjust their thinking on this. I'm not saying that you're even still favored to win that matchup, and I think that's okay. Matchups are not going to be nearly as 50-50 as they were before. Where we've left the ship has departed that building.
No, I think you're saying if you want to play a Rebel Gunline, like a pure Rebel Gunline.
Yeah, you need to accept that your matchup against Krennic DTs is 80-20 in their favor if you didn't bring Tauntauns, and that's okay. You've probably got higher percentage wins against other lists.
Actually,
not everybody's gonna. Go ahead.
So I don't know what you would consider a Rebel Gunline, but I've been running Jedi Luke with triple sniper and an FD, and I've done just fine against Shore Gunlines.
I bet you that's 100% because of Luke and the FD cannon, though, and the snipers. Now you have units that outrange them.
Well, sure, totally, but like Rebels have access to those units,
right?
And I would still consider that a gunline, even though it's got Luke and an FD and snipers in it. I don't think
it's less of a gunline than Krennic triple shores, right?
Well, sure, but I think that's fine, right? Like.
I think it is too. I'm just to be clear, I'm like tossing numbers, pulling them out of my, behind here. But I the general premise I'm trying to say is that it's okay that a list is not as good against some lists.
Right, we're
whether it be the Rebel Gunline or whatever. We happen to be talking about Rebel Troopers right now, so that's why I'm bringing up the Rebel Gunline.
And I think that's fine. We're entering rock, paper, scissors territory. I also think, at least in my experience, having played all these things now, I feel a lot more comfortable as Rebels against the Shore Gunline than I do as CIS.
Yeah, totally.
So,
like range 4 Krennic Gunline against droids is just pick your battles
that's
off the
terrible,
table, man. Because 4 shots are going through cover, like every shot at range 4, and you can't fire back at range 4. You pretty much have to rely on your Droidekas and Grievous to carry the day, and that's a tall order, especially when Droidekas are not that good against range 4 gunlines, because their shields are great, but once they're gone,
you have 48 wounds and I have 25 as a rebel.
Yeah,
and you're saying we're almost approximate if you have surges on defense.
Yeah, but you also have no access to range 4 or 5 shooting.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I really felt that pain playing CIS against the Shore Gunline. I'm like, man, where are my snipers?
where are my snipers? Yeah.
I think it's important. The takeaway here is that we got to make sure that we're thinking about everything in the context of what's available to the faction as a
right. And I guess my argument is that there are better things to invest in these days than Z6s.
That
I think is maybe not undoubtedly true, but it's very likely.
I think that's a defensible position. I also think you can still take those other toys and also take Z6s. But
I think 6. You can take Leia 6Z6 triple tauntaun, right? That's the thing. I think you can still throw snipers.
It's Leia 5Z6 2 sniper triple taunts, and then you have some room for jammers and uplink.
Okay. That list is
it's solid. That's what I've been playing.
Really good.
It's very solid.
That's good.
It's just a real pain in the butt when you get smashed by, their guns, despite the fact that your Tauntauns are in there trying to eat them.
Well, I do think that that list is a little bit more of a
it's very one-dimensional.
Yeah, like if the Tauntauns die, like you need to be prepared.
Yeah, well, if they die without having done enough work.
Right.
There's a lot of. That's what I meant. I can go into a different realm here and talk about what Empire has that screws Tauns, but that's a different discussion for a different show, probably.
No, certainly not the hot take we're talking about right now.
We're already like 40 minutes into this one.
Sorry. So this turned into a rant. I understand.
We should just release an episode every week that's Notorious Scoundrels.
Yeah, 2 separate podcasts.
I guess.
I mean, maybe this conversation changes with the DLT-20A from the Specialist Pack. I guess we'll see. It definitely helps to make, that they can shoot at range 4. I mean, it's not...
Yeah, it definitely helps the clone matchup. If we're talking about gun lines.
I said now I'm just short troopers without surges and no fire support.
For 20 less points.
Fire support a lot of the time is a trap.
We've covered that. Yeah.
I think it's more that you're missing target.
That's what I mean when I say wow factor. Nimble wow factor. Oh, gee whiz.
But I think it is important to, like, when we're talking about the DLT-20, and we should move on to gun lines. So I don't want this. We'll talk separately about the DLT-20, but it's a 1 dice short of a T-21, and there's 66 points instead of 84.
That's pretty hot.
All right. Let's move on to, since we've been talking about gun lines, let's move on to Legion 101.
It's time for Legion 101. Class is in session.
So I think that we've actually talked about this before, but I think that it's a good time to talk about it again because there's more asymmetry than there was before, as we've just been talking about for 40 minutes. Also because it came up, I think, quite a bit in good focus in our game last week between me and Mike. If you haven't caught that, first of all, please go check it out. It's really more of a battle report than Mike shaking his head. It's really more of a battle report than a podcast. So if you want to watch it on YouTube, that will be a fun place.
Excuse me, casted game is the correct.
I'm sorry. Casted game. You're right. Yes. It is a good time. The 4 of us hang out and Mike and I play a game, and stuff happens.
We do some singers.
Yeah. Well, one of those things that happens though is at least in a clone CIS matchup that still plays out sort of like a traditional, like, pure gunline matchup. So if you're looking for a good example of how to conduct that, please watch that game. But let's just talk generally, like, about some tips. And this is not necessarily specifically if you're just running a gunline list. This holds, these things hold true with oh, sorry. Yeah. So there was one we're doing it wrong from our thing last week.
I would just like to clarify this. It's not a we're doing it wrong. It's a Kyle forgot his keywords.
I'm sorry.
Kyle
was doing it wrong.
Just to be clear.
Droidicas have immune deflect. There was a time in that game when a Droidica took a deflect wound. That was wrong. So
it did not matter.
It was totally irrelevant. Yeah. Yeah. I realized it late in the game, and I'm like, it's not worth bringing up.
Yeah.
But anyway. So Droidicas have immune deflect. Our bad. I knew that somewhere in my brain. It just was in cold storage.
He was just beating the crap out of me so solidly that
yeah, I'm like, whatever. Wins on
Droidicas.
Yeah, it was fine. Who cares?
It was kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah. No, but seriously, yeah, Droidicas have immune deflect. My bad. But anyway, let's talk about my gun lines and how to generally engage in shooting things and moving up and positioning in Legion. So you look like you're about to say something there, Mike.
Yeah, so I think the opening part of this conversation, at least in my mind, is that you have to take into account the activation count differential is probably the biggest like game plan decider of playing a gunline, right? Because the biggest thing that you need to focus on when playing a gunline is dealing the damage and not taking it.
Yep, attrition, as we often say.
Yeah. So if you are, I think your game plan changes significantly when you're running a gunline. If you're down on activations, if you're tied on activations, or if you're up on activations.
And can you go into how and why that is?
Yeah. So when you're down on activations, you kind of have to either rely on a character like Luke or Obi-Wan to make a play so that so let me back this up and explain why that's important. So fundamentally, the most decisive part of a gunline fight is the first few shots and who can shoot who and like when in the turn that happens. So generally speaking, the person who flinches first kind of takes the worst end of the engagement. If I move and shoot, that unit, if that unit moves up into range and shoots another unit, generally, if your opponent has positioned well, the unit that fired the first shot is not going to survive the turn.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah. And so what the decision point here is that if you're down on activations, your opponent is going to be able to make that first shot at the end of a given turn without repercussion, generally. So, which puts you into two positions, one of two positions. The first is you have to gamble and toss one of your units out kind of early and take some shots. I think you can see kind of like what that looks like in the game that Kyle was referring to that we showed on stream last week. Because, the clones kind of were in that position a little bit. You were also sort of in that position. I think we were tied on activations at the beginning of that game.
No, I think
but you can kind of see that. Yeah. But you can kind of see how the opening volley of a gunline goes. Kyle kind of has a droid unit that sticks his head out there, takes a shot at one of my clone units, does pretty minimal damage, and then just gets wrecked. So essentially what I'm saying is that activation count really matters. And if you stick your head out too early and lose an activation, you're going to be in a really bad place. So you need to decide when to engage. And generally that'll be towards the end of a turn because the repercussions for engaging poorly are less towards the end of a turn. Once you're engaged, you're stuck in, things kind of get crazy. And a lot of that kind of flies out the window. But the other way that you can deal with that if you're down on activations is you can stick, make a high impact play with a Luke or a Vader or a Kenobi, somebody who can kind of jump out there at the end of a turn, soak a shot with a dodge token, and then immediately jump in and take an activation off the board so that your opponent is A, concentrating on the dude with the lightsaber, and B, allowing you some space to work with, move up, and initiate the gunline fight in a time and place of your choosing.
Yeah, and I think the reason that our game is such a good example of this, I think, is because like both of us at one point make what is essentially like a gunline play mistake. Yep. I think on the first turn, I threw a B1 out there to detonate a mine, and I just basically like failed to measure properly. And I put him, I think you had two activations left still. I put him within move shoot range of two of your Z6 units. And like the core principle that you just touched on is at the beginning of the game, you want to not give your opponent free shots. And by free shots, that is generally speaking a shot in which like your opponent can make an attack on one of your units and not be in a position to take a meaningful attack in return on that turn. And that's exactly what happened in the first turn in our game. But then it kind of flipped in the second turn because I think you had a suppressed clone unit, and then you chose to just make an attack, and they weren't able to move back. So then you still had that clone unit kind of hanging out there, for the rest of the turn.
Yeah.
And then I moved up and shot it with several B1 units. And, we're talking about activation count. Activation timing is really important here to this conversation too. We talk sometimes about like proactive and reactive activations, and then there's also timing neutral activations. And you essentially want to progress your turn, like when you're in this gunline stage, from like proactive to reactive activations. So like at the beginning of your turn, you want to kind of identify which units are going to do things that your opponent is not going to have any effect on, and vice versa. So units that are like basically out of range of anything meaningful, or, maybe they're on like a backfield objective and they're going to be able to move and interact with that objective without any counterplay from your opponent or getting shot. You want to activate those units first. And then you kind of want to transition to your timing neutral units, which are often units that are basically in the same category, but ones that, are not going to expose themselves to do whatever you want to do with them. And then eventually you want to transition near the end of the turn to your reactive units, which are ones that will potentially expose themselves to enemy fire if they do the thing that you want them to do. And that's why activation count is so important, because as you noted, if you're down on count and you do one of those reactive things, and then you've got a unit hanging out there and your opponent's taking free shots, like that tends to snowball, right? Like attrition has a snowball effect. Because once you lose, sorry, go ahead. Once you lose an activation, like you're then less able to do that sort of first free shot situation. Because ideally, you throw that unit out last, you take a free shot at your opponent, and then the start of the next turn, you take that free shot, and then you back them right up.
Right. It's worth noting that the kind of progression that you just talked about with kind of less impactful units, or like objective units going first, as soon as you've engaged, that dichotomy changes immediately. You all of a sudden want those objective grabbing units to go last because they're not important, and your units that are like engaged need to be doing things before they get wrecked.
Also, it's important to shoot unactivated squads when you have the opportunity as well, is to get that tempo shift rolling in your direction. Yeah,
if you can do so without.
Right. Well, I was specifically talking about when we're actually when the scrum is there, like the turn after the engagement. Then like you start looking for ways to suppress your opponent's inactivated units, as long as it's moderately safe to do so.
Yeah, and even once you're sort of in the scrum, so to speak, depending on positioning, like you might be in a situation where you're still exposing a unit by moving up and shooting. Yeah. Like it's so it's important to understand too when that's the case, like when you should just either stand your ground and shoot a unit you're already in range of, even if that unit has activated already, or shoot it and then move away with a specific unit, which I do a ton with Rebels in particular. That's part of why I think the dodge action is not great, just because I don't think dodge tokens are terrible. I think the dodge action is bad simply because whenever I find myself in a position where I'm like, I want to shoot and take the dodge action, it's almost always better to just shoot and then move out of danger.
Yeah. Turns out not getting shot at is way better than having a dodge token.
Yeah, I mean, you save all the, what's the phrase? The best defense dice are the ones you don't roll.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is again, why. I mean, dodge. You use dodge if you couldn't move away. Like, say, I have to be here because I have to score intercept or whatever.
Right.
But like you said, you don't look to dodge first. You look to move out of danger first.
Exactly. Yep. And then you can just, the next turn, if you want to shoot again with that unit, then you move back in and shoot hopefully near the end of the turn.
This is also why we say always be measuring, because measuring lets you determine whether these things are possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, measuring super important here. This is why also, we talk about like exactly range 3 or exactly range whatever.
Yep.
That's another reason this is so important, is especially if you have a range advantage. Like if you've got a range 4 gun and you're shooting something that only has range 3 guns. If you go to exactly range 4 and shoot them, it's impossible, even if they clear their suppression, for them to move up and return fire, because a speed 2 move, which is what most trooper units have, is slightly shorter than range 1. So if they don't clear their suppression, it's going to take 2 turns for them to get into range to shoot you in that situation, assuming they're not constantly getting shot, which is probably what's happening.
Right. Well,
so this is also why we talk about, especially for rebels, snipers and being so important in this type of play, is because you could, they can engage your opponent before they can fire back at you in most cases, unless they are also talking about other snipers, right? Snipers can outrange a T-21B. They can do the thing to the T-21B that the T-21B can do to your rebel troopers. And I have noticed too that Empire players are kind of dropping snipers for, mortars and shores and other spicy things, which in this particular setup, I think is kind of a mistake, because snipers are still really good.
Yeah, still really good. High velocity works against dodges.
Yeah, well, and
Tauntauns.
Pierce works against, aggressive tactics saves.
Ask any Tauntaun player how it feels when a sniper hip fires you and puts 2 wounds on your Tauntaun through your dodges.
Probably not good, right?
Yeah, it feels terrible. It's half a Tauntaun gone, because you weren't going to save against that sniper rifle anyway. Let's be real.
Well, and it's also a way, we talk a lot about, so let's delve real quick into slight tangent into to counter Tauntaun play with snipers, because you talked about it. That
would be useful.
Tauntauns are difficult to hide. And they also generally want to go to last. So if you have 2 to 3 snipers, you can punish a Tauntaun player for holding their Tauntauns by just shooting them with snipers.
Yeah. The thing that makes them good is totally negated by high velocity.
Right. So if someone's holding their Tauntauns back, if you can get snipers on those Tauntauns, start taking shots. You're going to build up suppression, and you're going to put them in a position where they're like, well, I guess I have to move this thing to get it out of line of fire of the snipers.
Then they end up moving closer to your unactivated units if your snipers go first.
Right, exactly.
Which is a win-win for you. You basically flush them out, and then they get eaten if they have nowhere to go that's safe.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that was a tangent. But
yeah, just a little pro tip there for everybody who's having trouble dealing with these things.
All right, so that was do you guys have anything else to say on gun lines? I know that was super quick.
I just want to reinforce, a lot of the time you need to recognize if you're winning or losing the attrition war. Because that really informs the decisions that you need to make. If you're winning the attrition war, keep playing the gunline fight and, make sure that you're, balancing, pulling guys back out of range and things like that. But if you're losing the fight, you need to start taking gambles. And because you're not going to win the attrition war, you're gonna have to stick somebody out there and hope that you roll well, or they roll poorly, and I think that people need to a lot of people are like, I don't know why I lost that game, and you got buried in range 4 dice because you never took a risk, right? Sometimes you just gotta buck up and at the end of the turn double move something in so that you can be the first one to engage on the next turn. You might have to soak a shot and it might decide the game, but it's probably a better out than just sitting there and trying to fight rebel trooper gunline against death troopers, or whatever. So just something to bear in mind. That's not something that's super teachable. You kind of have to go with your gut, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't.
My inner rebel is laughing at you, Dash, because you're playing Empire, and it's sort of like, you don't need to hope about rolling well. You can fix your dice. I can't.
Well, I mean,
I think in this context, you mean defensive dice.
Generally speaking, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yes.
And don't get me wrong, we have a little bit of an advantage there. But, defensive dice are great, but they still fold to, having to roll 20 saves,
yeah, of course.
So I think it's important that people recognize that, units like Luke and Operative Vader and stuff, those are the units that sometimes you have to take a gamble with in these fights to make it work. And you should not be afraid of taking those risks if you're losing the game.
Well, and those are great examples too of units that, like, even if they take a couple of wounds on the way in, once they're in there, like, your opponent's going to have problems,
right?
Yeah, especially when you have a counter melee unit. So
yeah, and then, like, Operative Vader is fantastic against gunline lists. You get him in there, you like Master of Evil, you like choke out a heavy, you kill another squad that heavy's not a part of. Everything's suppressed, and they're down 2 heavies from the get go.
Good old implacable Master of the Force double choke.
Right, like, and he can do that twice if you want. Yep. There are ways to combat gunline lists, and
just get in their faces and deny them the ability to shoot. But the question is, will you survive getting in their faces?
Yeah, and that's where the gamble is, right? Like, Fear and Dead Men is really good at making that gamble a lot less of a gamble.
So as Darkness Descends. all
of these units we're talking about, these aggressive close range units, have tools to close that distance safely, right?
Yeah.
Like, you talked about 2 of them. Luke has My Ally is the Force and full of surprises. He's got tools to turn their opponent's gun line against him and serve your master well. So
yeah, Luke's really good at this, frankly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's if you're in an asymmetrical situation like that, don't rebellions are built on hope. So.
Yeah, don't balk, because you'll lose if you balk.
Yep. All right, you guys got anything else on this topic?
Just keep measuring. Always measure. Always take into account the range of a move shoot.
Always be measuring.
Number 1. Yeah. And also, before you make a decision, look at the board and try to figure out who has gone and who hasn't, and then measure from the people who haven't.
Well, and the other thing too, I'll say here just real quick, is like, be patient. Like, you got time, or in theory you have time. This is a little bit of a different story, I guess, if you're in a tournament with short round times, but like, most objectives center around scoring at the end of the game, and it's a 6-turn game. Like, I see a lot of newer players just kind of rush in to try and engage their opponent as quickly as possible. When in fact, especially if you got a range advantage, you should just be waiting them out. Like, take some pot shots, take some dodge standbys. Like, it's not the end of the world to just kind of burn a turn to avoid exposing a unit unnecessarily.
This is also why high activation lists that could play restively were so dominant for so long, and kind of still are. Let's be frank.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm thinking about Deep Shores. Yeah, activation is
still good. Hot take.
Yeah, no. Activation when coupled by extremely competent, highly fixable range 4 shooting.
Salt. The salt in San Francisco right now is high.
Yeah. You're talking about Rebel sniper strike teams, right?
Maybe.
Are you casting from the beach?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
My
state's on fire, man. That's why these takes are so hot.
Speaking of FD cannons, I just want to give a shout out to the FD cannon, which I've used in 4 of my 5 games so far from round robin. And I heart you, FD cannon.
I love you, FD.
Yep, it's awesome. Range 5, it really makes a difference on that thing, let me tell you.
I'd like to thank my mom and this FD cannon for winning the tournament.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
Yep. All right, so dealer's choice. We got a few minutes left here. You guys want to talk droidicas or airbrushing? All right.
I have no opinion on either.
All right. Well, I'm going to make an executive decision then, because since we only have a few minutes, I think droidicas are worth more time than we have right now. So let's talk about airbrushing.
Get out your brush and paint. It's hobby time.
All right. So a lot of people have been randomly asking about airbrushing recently, probably because of droids. So for those that don't know what it is, it's I've talked about it, previously somewhat in passing, but like an airbrush is a tool that sprays air through it, and you put paint in some kind of container, and it essentially like sprays the paint onto the model. It's not like a spray can. An aerosol can has other stuff in it, and has self-contained propellant. An airbrush is just literally like air pushed through it, a receptacle, and then it pushes paint onto your model. So it is, as far as like quality is concerned, it's far more consistent and even and controllable than like an aerosol can. You can't really paint with a can, right? Like you can prime with a can, but you can't really paint with a can. You can actually paint with an airbrush. So it's a great tool for when you have to do something sort of en masse like droids, which is what I plan on doing for mine. I also did my stormtroopers and my a lot of my rebels now with an airbrush. It's one of those things that you get like super intimidating, but you get progressively better at. I initially just prime stuff with it, and eventually progressed to like doing actual painting with it. But that probably took about a year and a half from when I started using it. So, it definitely takes practice. But like if you're thinking about getting into it or trying it out, several points of advice. First is like, don't be intimidated. It's like anything else, it's a learned skill. And once you figure it out, it's like, I can't go back to painting with the brush, like a regular brush. It just feels so like time consuming and old fashioned. Don't get me wrong, you still got to do some of that. Like you can't paint someone's eyeballs with an airbrush. But like the main sweeps of everything and things like droids that are all one color, essentially, you can do. Like an airbrush can do all the things that contrast paints can do, basically. Yeah, that's the first, is don't be intimidated. It's worth the effort. It feels like cheating. The second is
Kyle likes to cheat, by the way. He forgets that his stuff is immune to default.
Yeah, man. Like, gosh.
Yeah.
Go watch this guy.
Where do I get this? Like,
he's just salty.
Anyway,
he lost you on camera. Keep going.
Yeah. So watch some YouTube videos. There's a ton of them out there. Don't just like try it without reading some stuff and watching videos first. Because airbrushes are expensive and you can mess them up if you don't use them right. Particularly like letting primer dry on your airbrush. Don't do that. I know that from experience.
So clean it religiously, right? Like, yeah.
Yes. And clean it properly. Every airbrush cleans differently. They have like specific instructions. The one that I would personally recommend is, and they're not like paying me or anything. I don't even actually have this airbrush, but the Badger Patriot 105. It's really easy to clean. It's relatively inexpensive and it's good. So if you're thinking about getting into airbrushing, research that one. I personally have an Aztec, which is also very good, but slightly more finicky. It's kind of like if the Badger Patriot 105 is the AK-47, the Aztec is like an M16.
Those are some very interesting and topical comparisons.
Yeah, right.
Would you say that one's like a Z6 and the other one's like a DLT?
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's harder to clean. It's harder to maintain. It's still amazing. But yeah. Yeah, and then just do your research on equipment. You're gonna definitely want like an actual airbrush compressor. I know that people have tried to do this with like tool compressors, but the primary difference between like a tool compressor and an airbrush compressor is that an airbrush compressor has a regulator on it, which means that it regulates the flow of air so that it's constant. With a tool compressor, it's like you'll get like, you can't see what I'm doing on camera, but I'm flicking at the camera. You'll get like spurts of air in random intervals that will be very bad for your painting. So And if you live in a humid area, which I do, you also want one with a moisture trap, which is another thing that normally comes on airbrush compressors. So, that's my super.
You want to talk about managing overspray?
Yeah. So, so when you spray with an airbrush, you will get overspray, which basically means that, like, you know, like picture a spray can. If you're spraying a model, not all of that paint is going to get on the model. Some of it's going to go past the model, right? So I just spray it in my garage, and I use a fan to push it out the garage. But you don't actually like need to do that, because at least if you're using acrylic paint, which you probably are if you're painting miniatures, acrylic paint is non-toxic. There's no like health risk if you want to do airbrushing inside. You know, you just got to be prepared for that overspray to go somewhere. Like, don't do it, you know, in your bedroom if you don't want your wall to get painted.
But I think some people build like these. They build like traps made out of like foam for like the extra paint, or or even cardboard. Like have a theater sort of to do their painting indoors in. Yep.
Yeah, you don't need like a fan. You know, it helps direct it if you want to do that. But if you just build some kind of, you know, like 3-sided cardboard situation, that's just as good. You know, you're not going to like choke on the acrylic airbrush fumes. They're non-toxic. So unlike an aerosol can, which you should not spray inside.
Yeah, don't do that. It's not
good. So yeah. Please don't sue me if you choke on airbrush fumes.
Yikes. I don't know this guy.
Yeah, I'd recommend managing it somehow, but it's not the end of the world. If you want to airbrush in an apartment, you can figure out how to do that. That's the thing that you can do. So, all right. Oh, and one more thing. Normally, what I do in terms of like practical terms is I do zenithal airbrushing, which basically means that, like for my droids, for example, you know, I prime them black. I did this for the Storms too. I primed them black, and then you just hit the model with ever lighter shades from ever steeper angles. So, you know, if you do black on the whole thing, then you hit like a dark, my droids I'm doing red, you hit like a dark red, you know, like a 60-degree angle, and then you hit like a lighter red at like a 45-degree angle, and then you hit like an orange from straight up top, basically. That's kind of the essence of like at least the zenithal.
It gives the impression of a light source.
Right. And I did the same thing actually with my Pathfinders and some of my Rebel Troopers, and I did it with like a cloth color. And it actually turned out much better than I thought it would. It works best on units that have like droids that have a lot of smooth edges and stuff like that. But you can also use it for more complex things like cloth. And if you do it right, it still looks good. So, all right. That was a little bit of a rant, if you will, on airbrush. But yeah, you guys got anything?
I just think people will be pleasantly surprised when they try it. I think they should. I think it's a worthwhile investment, especially if you're going into the hobby for the long term. You can save yourself and your eyes a lot of aggravation by airbrushing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's faster and better than contrast paints, if you guys can believe that. Not that contrast paints are bad, but yeah, it's like people are like, oh, contrast paints are so cheating. It's like one step beyond that.
Again with the cheating, dude.
I mean, I don't blame you when you have to paint 48 droids. Like, by all means, man, if you can get those suckers on the table faster, like, just do it.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm gonna base them with play sand and not even paint the bases, because I can't do like painted bases for 50 droids.
You can't just airbrush the bases brown and then like put some sand on them.
You can actually. The struggle with me, and maybe this is just one extra degree of laziness, I like to just have them glued on the bases when I paint them. Which is, you know, if you want to then paint the bases, you can't do that if the model's glued to it and you don't want the model to be the same color.
Well, yeah, if you're. I mean, there's workarounds. So, like you can do texture paint.
There's ways.
Cool.
Yeah, you can pick also up a brush.
Like for real, like the rest of us.
Yeah,
like the rest of us, I guess, who use brushes still.
You can also use. So this is an airbrushing technique. You can do what's called masking. because the golden rule with an airbrush is the airbrush can only paint what it can see. So you can use like a mask, like a piece of cardboard or something, and you can actually paint bases that way. If you do that, you'll get a little bit of color on the feet of the model too, but sometimes that's okay if you're doing like mud or sand or something. Anyway, yeah, that was probably 10 minutes too long on airbrushing, but
should have talked about Droid Echoes. God.
Well, next week we'll talk about Droid Echoes. I know we were supposed to talk about them like 4 episodes ago, but
yeah, we'll cover them.
Yeah, stay tuned. Yep. Good luck to everybody. Invader League Single Elim starts this week. Good luck to everybody in that.
There's going to be some sort of pre-show. We don't know what it looks like yet, but it's going to happen. I promise. You'll know about it. Just keep your eyes peeled to the Discord if you're on the Discord. On the Discord there.
Yeah. So, and even if you're not playing in Invader League, they will be doing a March Madness style bracket prediction with a pretty good prize. I don't know if we know what it is yet, but yeah, go ahead and check that out and fill out a bracket. I feel like I have a better chance of winning a bracket for Legion than I do college basketball, at least. So,
any final thoughts, gentlemen, before we sign off here?
I wish
you could
final
see the hand
thoughts.
motions Jay's making right now. They're incredible.
Yeah. This is yeah. All right. Well, I also have no final thoughts.
So for Notorious Scoundrels, my name is David.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Mike.
We'll see you next time.
Stay fresh, cheese.
Join us next week for another episode of the Notorious Scoundrels.
This has been a 5th Trooper production.